Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed for another Starfield benchmark video. This time we're looking at CPU performance across 44 different processors at 1080p using 3 different quality settings. This gives us a comprehensive look at how Starfield performs while CPU limited across a wide variety of hardware, so you'll know what to expect and how to plan for an upgrade. It's fair to say that Starfield is a highly demanding game on both GPU and CPU hardware. We've found many areas in the game so far that are either brutal on GPUs, brutal on CPUs, or brutal on both GPUs and CPUs at the same time. If you want the ultimate experience in the game, you'll need some pretty powerful hardware, and we've already seen how only the very top-end GPUs are capable of above 60 FPS using high-quality settings at decent resolutions. Similar can be said about CPU performance. If you have older or mid-range CPU hardware, it's likely that in CPU-demanding areas, you won't achieve amazing performance. With that said, I think high CPU demands in this game are more understandable than the high GPU demands given what is on offer. It's fairly common for open world games with many complex systems to take a big toll on the CPU, maybe not to the degree of Starfield, but certainly CPU performance is usually a challenge in big open games. On the other hand, the visuals on offer in Starfield don't always live up to the massive performance toll on the GPU side.
Today's sponsor spot is brought to you by Thermal Grizzly and their new 12th gen CPU contact frame by deBauer. It's well known that the integrated loading mechanism, or ILM, of the LJ1700 sockets bends 12th gen CPUs, leading to an uneven contact surface that reduces cooling performance. Solving this issue, the contact frame replaces the ILM, allowing for a much more even contact with the CPU's IHS and the base of your cooler, which in turn reduces operating temperatures. Installation's quick and easy, and thanks to the use of anodized aluminium, the contact frame is non-conductive. And then, for those of you who wish to further maximize contact, Thermal Grizzly now offers an optional lapping tool. So for more information, please check the link in the video description.
For today's testing, we're looking at a range of CPUs dating as far back as 1st gen Ryzen and Intel's 7th gen Core series using the test systems listed on screen. Steve has done all of the testing for today's video. Again, he's still a bit unwell and busy with a few other things, but you can see how he's tested here. This includes using DDR5 memory for the platforms that support this, and the GPU used for testing is the NVIDIA GeForce RTX 4090, the ASUS ROG Strix OC version with the latest game-ready drivers for this title, 537.13. The area we're using for testing is much later into the game than New Atlantis, a planet called Aquila, with a settlement here that is very CPU demanding, slightly more so than New Atlantis on some hardware. Most settlements or cities like this are very CPU demanding and likely to be CPU limited, so this testing is very representative of what you can expect in those areas. We'll start here with testing the ultra quality preset at 1080p. Again, this is with FSR disabled, so no upscaling and the native 1080p image. When it comes to the very latest hardware, Intel has a clear edge in Starfield, with the Core i9-13900K offering a 20% boost to average FPS over the Ryzen 7 7800X3D, which is the fastest CPU from Team Red. This does shrink to just a 9% margin in favor of Intel in 1% lows, but either way you look at it, Intel 13th gen is fastest in Starfield. And if you're after a high refresh rate experience above 90 FPS in these cities, there are very few CPUs to choose from. We have the 7800X3D and Intel's Raptor Lake K series models, while the 12900K also gets very close to this threshold. It's also interesting to note that the 13900K is 9% faster than the 13700K and 14% faster than the 13600K, benefiting from more cache and higher clock speeds. The 13900K is also a huge 21% faster than the 12900K, possibly due to factors like the significant increase to L2 cache and more L3 cache overall, given max clock speeds are just 12% higher on the 13th gen model. 80 FPS and above is only possible on Zen 4 and Alder Lake processors or newer, with most of AMD's Zen 4 lineup falling between 79 and 90 FPS. The Ryzen 7 7800X3D achieves 10% more performance than the Ryzen 7 7700X thanks to its extra L3 cache, so Starfield can benefit from extra cache, but not to as significant of a degree as some other games. The 7950X3D though barely improves over the 7950X, and overall the 7950X is just 4% faster than the 7600X. Given that the 7700X and 7600X are neck and neck, this is a strong indication that Starfield is not core dependent. There is a wealth of CPUs from Intel that are capable of more than 60 FPS in Starfield from the Core i9-9900K and up, including popular mid-range models like the Core i5-11400F that offers 65 FPS on average, and the Core i5-13400F at 76 FPS. In fact, most Core i5s from the 10th gen and up are well suited to 60 FPS on average or more. Outside of AMD's Zen 4 processors though, your only chance of getting a 60 FPS experience using ultra settings in CPU demanding areas with an AMD CPU is using either the Ryzen 7 5800X3D at 67 FPS or the 5600X3D at 65 FPS. Interestingly here, the Vcache parts have a large advantage over non-Vcache, 18% faster for the 5800X3D versus 5800X. Performance on other Zen 3 processors is disappointing, falling short of 60 FPS on most occasions, offering around 55 FPS like with the Ryzen 5 5600 for example. This is still playable, but Intel's options from a similar era have ended up a little faster. The Core i7-10700K is 14% faster than the Ryzen 7 5800X. Older Zen 2 processors fall further behind. The Ryzen 7 3700X is good for just 50 FPS here, but so is the Ryzen 5 3600, which again shows that core count is not an issue for Starfield. It's more about other aspects to CPU performance once you have enough overall processing power. Even 4 cores is enough. The Ryzen 3 3300X is just 1 FPS behind the 3700X and offers 48% more performance than the 8-core Ryzen 7 1700. The lowest performing CPUs we've tested are from the Zen and Zen Plus eras, as well as the Core i7 7600K. The Ryzen 7 2700X only average 40 FPS, which is why products around this performance tier are the minimum requirement for this title. Once you get down to the Ryzen 7 1700, it's very much a console-like experience with just a 33 FPS average. Meanwhile, the Core i5 7600K shows that having 4 cores with just 4 threads is not sufficient for a modern game, offering a horrible 1% low experience. But so long as there are 8 threads, the game ran okay. The Core i7 7700K with 4 cores and 8 threads ran surprisingly well for a CPU that launched nearly 7 years ago, though it is far from a top-tier experience. With high settings at 1080p, again tested with upscaling disabled, there's not a substantial difference in performance compared to Ultra. Every CPU gets a little faster, in the range of 5 to 10% is typical, but this doesn't fundamentally change the order of CPUs, and it doesn't magically make slow processors run well. It does nudge a few extra Zen 4 CPUs above 90 FPS, such as the Ryzen 9 7900X, while parts like the Core i5 13400F and Ryzen 9 7900 are now good for at least 80 FPS. When we get to older CPUs, we see less of an impact from high settings. The 5800X3D does see a 5 FPS increase to 72 FPS, but the 5600X is just 2 FPS faster on average and just 4% faster for 1% lows. This makes most Zen 3 processors near on a 60 FPS average, though minimum performance will be closer to 50 FPS. That's playable without being amazing. Meanwhile, the 7600K is still totally unusable, and the oldest Zen processors continue to struggle and mostly deliver a console-like experience. Using medium settings at 1080p, performance is typically around 10 to 15% higher than using ultra settings in this area. So like we found in our CPU optimization video, there's very little scaling on offer here through quality settings. Intel's Core i9-13900K continues to offer 20% greater performance than the 7800X3D in this game, although now the 7800X3D is able to deliver 103 FPS, and most other Zen 4 CPUs are good for 90 FPS on average or more. This still restricts premium high refresh rate gaming to the latest and greatest processors. In the middle of the chart, we have several CPUs offering between 70 and 80 FPS, including the Core i9-9900K, Core i5-11400F, Ryzen 5 5600X3D, and the 5800X3D, as well as 10900K and 11600K. Then at just above 60 FPS, we have several other Zen 3 CPUs like the Ryzen 5 5600. Using these settings, the 5800X3D offered a 14% uplift over the 5800X, so a little lower than we saw using the Ultra preset. Unfortunately, for the lowest end gamers, there isn't a slam dunk preset that will allow for much more playable performance. The Ryzen 5 3600 does improve from 50 FPS using Ultra to 55 FPS using Medium, but this isn't much to get excited about. The Ryzen 7 2700X is still more around a 45 FPS experience, while the aging Ryzen 7 1700 is still really just a 30 FPS experience in Starfield. We did see a few comments online suggesting that Starfield is highly memory sensitive, however that's not what we've found to be the case looking at some brief scaling on Intel's Raptor Lake processors. Using ultra settings at 1080p, we saw virtually no difference between DDR4 3800 and DDR5 4800 memory on the Core i9 13900K and Core i5 13400F. At best, we were able to achieve an 8% uplift in average FPS using DDR5 7200 over DDR5 4800 for the 13900K, but this dropped to just 6% for the 13400F. When we last looked at 13th gen memory scaling, we found that in a 7-game sample, DDR5 7200 provided a 13% uplift over DDR5 4800 on average, so Starfield is a below average result in that respect. And we can confirm this using other settings like the high preset. The 13900K was just 2% faster using basic DDR5 over DDR4, and just 5% faster moving up to DDR5 7200. The 13400F here was 8% faster using high-speed DDR5 memory, but the difference from DDR4 to DDR5 4800 was negligible. And then using medium settings, the 13900K was 9% faster using DDR5 7200 over DDR5 4800, and the 13400F was 8% faster from the same configuration. Again, all of these results are below what we usually expect moving from DDR4 3800 to DDR5 7200 on an Intel platform, which suggests that memory is not a primary performance issue for Starfield, though you can certainly benefit a little bit from premium DDR5. So that's all of our CPU performance data for Starfield across 44 different parts. As you can see, Starfield is a very demanding title on CPUs, and you'll require one of the latest processors to achieve even close to a high refresh rate experience in taxing city areas. Meanwhile, older processors have been firmly relegated to the mid-range, and even popular parts from AMD's Zen 3 series may not be sufficient for 60 FPS gaming depending on the quality settings used. We also discovered that typically you'll want to be using an Intel CPU over AMD for the best performance. The Core i9 13900K being 20% faster than the Ryzen 7 7800X3D was surprising to discover. That's a big margin between those parts. Intel's older Core i5 models also typically perform well relative to AMD, while older Zen processors, especially from the Zen and Zen Plus era, really struggle to deliver a good experience. There are lots of widely used processors right now that are unable to average 60 FPS in Starfield using the Ultra preset at 1080p, with only marginal improvements possible from medium quality settings. When recommending a CPU for Starfield, there's really only a few things that appear to matter: architecture performance, frequency, and to some degree cache. Newer processors that run at higher clock speeds and pack more L2 and L3 cache run Starfield better. Conversely, core count does not matter, as there are quad-core parts that easily defeat 8-core parts thanks to a better architecture and superior overall performance. Within the same series, especially from AMD, you won't see much difference between a 6-core and 16-core processor, so those who bought a more affordable 6-core model should be very happy to hear that. We also found that memory performance isn't all that important for Starfield. DDR5 memory, for example, is not a firm requirement. For those of you who have an AM4 motherboard, the obvious choice here is a Ryzen 7 5800X3D, as that part is capable of a 60 FPS experience and offers a strong performance increase over Zen 2 processors and even some Zen 3 models. If you have a Ryzen 5 3600, for example, dropping in a 5800X3D will increase performance by 34%, which is a sizable amount. And you'll see a staggering 72% increase using Ultra settings when going from a Ryzen 5 2600 to the 5800X3D, once again showing the strength of AMD's AM4 platform and the importance of longevity and upgradability. If you were planning on building a new system for Starfield and other games, or were planning on a full platform upgrade, then you'd only consider the very latest generation of hardware. The Core i9 13900K is the obvious choice for those that need the best Starfield performance, and even the Core i5 13600K performs very well, though this will limit your upgrade path to only 14th gen processors, which aren't expected to bring much of a performance increase. Zen 4 processors are slower for Starfield, though the 7800X3D is still quite capable, and AM5 offers a better upgrade path. It's tough to say which is the better option. It depends how much you weigh Starfield performance compared to other factors. It is safe to say, though, that building a new AM4 system for Starfield is out of the question, as the Ryzen 5 7600 is 19% faster than the 5800X3D. So if you are starting from scratch or planning that motherboard upgrade, definitely go no lower than a new AM5 build. Anyway, that's it for this CPU testing of Starfield, and probably for our Starfield coverage for now. I think that's 4 Starfield videos in a row, so if you're sick of Starfield, this is pretty much it for our video coverage. In the next coming days, you will see some new GPU reviews pop up on the channel, as you might be expecting, so that's sort of the next thing for us. You will see those very, very shortly, so stay tuned for that. Well worth to take a look at those. And yeah, if you do appreciate the sort of independent testing that we do on the channel, all that sort of thing, then please do consider supporting us via Patreon or Floatplane. Links to those are in the description below, and you'll gain access to things like our Discord community, BTS videos, monthly live streams, all that sort of good stuff. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.